The environment needs to be consistent or the kid's going to continue to scroll and do behavior. Pick something that's a better low-hanging fruit that the child really enjoys but won't melt down over it. It's a great place for your first contingent access in your fight for 15 minutes. It's the chaining of inappropriate behaviors that contingent access brings. For some kids, I don't think they think I need to do all these behaviors, but instead of A to B, they think they need to do A through G. I need to hit, I need to scream, I need to make as much noise as possible. Because eventually, this is what happens. The parent shows up, okay, what do you want? And the kid doesn't know how to access, so they start doing behavior. So they grab something. Do you want this? Oh, and do you want this? And so now something that could have been a 10 seconds or less communication attempt becomes a 5-minute kind of fiasco of you bringing things, you're frustrated, you're asking your kids lots of questions they can't answer. At the end of that, both people are tired. The kid has exhibited behavior. The parent is very confused and frustrated. And so what that does is actually demotivates both sides to engage in another communication attempt. And so A, that's one of the negative drawbacks. But B, what happens when the child takes you by the hand, then has a meltdown, and then still gets the cookie? The most common scenarios, next time they get in that situation, they're going to go back into those behaviors because that's the only stable thing they know that it gave them access to the cookie. And so we call that the bad ladder, meaning a kid does a behavior that accidentally gets reinforced, so we're not assigning blame, but there's a panic that happens when the child has behavior. And so either it's given to them and then the next time they do more behavior. And so by the time, someone like a behaviorist comes in, there's kind of 3 to 5 behaviors that are stacked on each other that we're trying to unwind like an onion. And that is when the contingent access is broken. So we try to simplify the process. And we'll definitely kind of talk later to try to talk the tools. But this is actually something that we see a lot, especially when a kid doesn't have early communication and starts to exhibit behavior, that they're just doing all of these chains of frustrating behavior. And both the family and the child are both frustrated with the whole entire process.
Yeah, I just think it's so important to remember it's not parents intentionally reinforce that behavior. And just like you said, it just really happened by accident. Sometimes we didn't even realize that we were reinforcing that escalated behavior, like biting or self-injury.
Absolutely. So when you start to set up the examples, just having some clarity for you on what things that you want to make contingent. So definitely all non-contingent things, simple water, those things a kid shouldn't ask for. But you should really think about this is just arbitrary, but what 2 specific foods that I do want to make sure there's a clean contingency to get access to. And then maybe there's 2 specific toys. In previous episodes, we talked about different sensory systems. Maybe in order to get this specific toy or tickle, you want to make sure you have a good, clean way for them to communicate. And by communication, choosing what method to use. I think sometimes we get so fixated, a kid has to say tickle all the way to get access. But this is where you reinforce the smallest effort on exactly what you want. And so this is where, if your child is very early in the communication cycle, just them saying tuh, or even them practicing using their mouth, that's what you want to reinforce as quickly as possible. So as soon as they, say tuh for tickle, especially if they're not a communicator, you want to give them tickles as quickly as possible. And so it's the immediacy that they made an attempt and then they get what they want. That is really good for the brain to then know what to repeat over and over and over. And so in kind of talking for the fight for 15 minutes, I think spending time on looking for contingent access opportunities and having things near you. We talked about tickles. Physicals are a really easy one to build contingencies. If you think about peekaboo, peekaboo is a contingent access game that humans do to each other, right? We color the eyes, and then it's the surprise, and then the kid's gonna immediately get the reinforcement of getting tickles and kind of goes the game back and forth. So maybe just having a couple of those contingent access games and using them to really build that connection, I think could be very, very beneficial.
This remind me of the owl strategy we talked about in one of our episode, like observe, wait and listen. With the peekaboo game, it's just wait for your child to say more, and you say peekaboo or make any sound, boo, peekaboo. And I think those moments, it's what we talk about, open the window of interaction, where your child starts to understand, oh, I just made that sound. My mommy, daddy said peekaboo.
Yes. And so when you start contingent access, it's to recognize a couple things that will take place. First of all, there will most likely be a slight rise in behavior because your child is used to just grabbing your hand and taking you somewhere. And then when you first kind of require anything, the kid's going to have some frustration. So I think to be ready for that. Now, we don't want extreme behavior, but you might have a little additional crying or additional flopping to the ground. So I think it's for you to kind of stay very calm, especially in those first couple of days of trying to rechange how a child communicates. Do want to prompt what they need to say, so there's no guessing. So that's for you to say, I like to get down to eye level when possible so they can really see my mouth. And sometimes I'll do multiple things. And so for a cookie, I'm going to look and be cookie, and I'm going to use the sign, and I'm going to verbally say it. And I'll accept anything. The child does this, the child is attempting, even if the child gives clean eye contact. All right, here is cookie. And I want to try to give it to him as fast as possible. So there's a little bit of potential behavior, and then you want to really prompt what you want them to do as quickly as possible. And they may make some errors, but you're taking that first movement towards what you want. And that is really how you slowly reward someone for the things that they do. In normal cases, every kid's different, but to really kind of change some contingent access, it probably takes anywhere from 3 to 7 days, depending on how long it's being built. You'll realize that some things are easier to teach. So pick a low-hanging fruit first. Don't try the hardest thing. And I always think, don't try the addicted things first, right? I don't think the tablet's the first thing you want to try when you're doing contingent access, because you're just going to have a lot of, you're fighting addiction and you're fighting other things. Pick something that's a better low-hanging fruit that the child really enjoys but won't melt down over it. I think it's a great place for your first contingent access in your fight for 15 minutes.
That's a great advice. I love it. I do want to do a follow-up question before we talk about how to use it at home. I know a lot of parents probably are dying to know, like, okay, what this look like to when I work with my kid at home. So a lot of parents, they are the primary caregiver, and also their other relatives, right? Like aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa. Say if a mom is listening to our podcast and learn about contingent access, how would this mom explain to grandparents about, hey guys, remember before we were just, Johnny grab our hands, we just give him what he wants and say Johnny hit his head, bang his head on the floor, and right now we're doing something called contingent access. Basically, it's the first then. So how do parents or mom explain to grandparents why it's important to do this?
You are correct that the environment needs to be consistent or the kid's going to continue to scroll and do behavior. I think the best thing in terms of getting the team on board, family members, key people in the family, is telling them that this is the best way to help improve your child's communication. Because if you say, we're teaching contingent access, to like, what is that? I just need to do this thing. He'll figure it out. And it's going to take too much time. What you need to specify is, when we do this, this gives my child, your grandson, the best opportunity to learn. And if we can really try for the next week, let's see how this works and try to get buy-in from that standpoint. So I think that's the best way to go about it. And this is where you start simple. It's pretty much telling folks, when he cries, don't give him the Coca-Cola right when he's crying, because you're teaching him that crying gives him the Coca-Cola. Instead, let's teach him to give Coca-Cola before he cries or after he stops crying, and then gives us this picture. Now we're teaching him the best thing for him, and then of course for the family, to reduce the crying. So if you go at it with the communication angle, I think you have a much better chance to convince parents, grandparents, or other people why this is important and not something that they should really take seriously.
Help them to understand. It will help with the communication, will reduce tantrum, those challenging behavior. And I think once grandparents see the change in a child, they would be on board.
Yes. And so it is really starting with something that is slow so that you can really provide that assistance.
What are some practical steps now parents have understood the importance of contingent access and what that look like? And also why it's important. How does that help with communication? We talk about the difference between reward and a bribe. Bribe is something comes, you have in your hand, comes before the behavior. And then reward is something, it's a consequence that following that behavior that you want. In this case, would be communication.
Thanks for watching. Are you ready for support? Look in the description below to book a free consultation call. We also have free downloadables from Parent Empowerment Coaching and our quest to help parents fight for 15 minutes. Stay empowered, stay informed. We'll talk again soon.